Hey, Laura, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shanae. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited. So, as you guys heard in the intro, Laura is a licensed psychotherapist, which is the fancy word for licensed therapist. But before we dive into it, Laura, I would love to hear from you. How did you get into this work?
Well, of course, every therapist, whether they want to believe it or not, are wounded healers. And so I got into this work because from the age of 11 to 19, I was hooked on drugs and was a pretty bad drug addict and went to treatment for 2 years. That was fun. And during that time, I said I was never going to work with these drug addicts because, they're self centered people. And I think the universe had different plans and wound up by a series of fortunate events. I wound up working in a drug treatment program and absolutely loved it. And when I was working there, though, one thing I realized is I was working in a women's day treatment program, and I would sit and talk with these women and hear their stories, and I would say, my goodness, if I had to deal with all they dealt with, I'd be on drugs too. And as I started to hear their stories, I realized that what I had to do in order to really help people heal was not just learn about 12 steps and relapse and coping skills, but I had to help people learn how to heal from the wounds that they've experienced in this life, because those wounds were what were keeping them feeling like they had to wake up every day and use drugs and alcohol. So that sent me on a quest, a 15-year, 16-year journey of trying to figure out how can I help people heal from wounds that they've picked up in this life and do it in a way that is fast and effective to where they don't have to necessarily relive it, and once it's done, it's done. And so that's kind of been the path and the quest I've been on, is trying to help others heal, but a lot of the healing has come to me first. Like everything that I do, everything that I offer, everything that I have went and paid money to get trained in were things that I experienced first, and I saw that they were helpful for me, because I feel like there is a saying that you can't take people where you've never gone, and I believe that's the truth. So that's my quick story about how I got into this work. It really chose me. I did not choose it. I was not going to do that. I was going to go sell insurance because that would be easy and I'd make more money. And that is not how it happened.
You guys can see why I'm obsessed with her. It's so true. It's like we so desire to make an impact on people, but like you gotta first, it always starts with you. It's like you just
Oh, yeah.
the impact starts from within. So, gosh, I have so many questions for you. I think first, I'd love to sort of like teach our audience a little bit about how these wounds and how this trauma that we go through in our lives, how does that affect our self belief and like what we think is possible for us?
Well, first off, I want to say that there are two types of wounds that I'll talk about during this podcast. The first is what collectively is known as trauma,
Mhm.
but I even piece that out into two subcategories. I say there are trauma wounds and there are attachment wounds. And so trauma wounds are the major life events that happen to us that kind of leave a mark in our timeline. I say there's like life before and there's life after. And people get to define what that is, not some book or some diagnostic code. They get to define what's trauma for them, but it's things that happen to us. Where attachment wounds are more about the wounding that happened because of what our caregivers, the people who were responsible for raising us, did not give us. So these are the things that should have happened that didn't happen in our life. I think all children are born with this innate desire to be seen, heard, valued, understood, and to grow up in an environment that's consistent and predictable. And when that doesn't happen, it creates attachment wounding. And I've been doing this for literally 16 years. And I always thought that trauma was the answer. We need to go treat the trauma, treat the trauma. If you treat the trauma, then people get better. Well, I have found a lot of people who've never had one of those major life events that have poor relationships with themselves, poor relationships with others, and just can't maintain stability in their life. And the reason why is the attachment wounds. And so, in the past probably 5 to 6 years, I have found that the attachment wounds are what cause majority of the problems in the world, because the way we learn who we are is by our how our caregiver reflects back to us who we are when we're children. So if we have a caregiver, a parent, mother, father, grandmother, whoever raised you, who's responsible for our primary nurturing, and that person doesn't have a good relationship with themselves, it's just like the therapist who can't take their client where they've haven't gone. They can't give to the child what the child needs to develop this healthy perception about themselves. We take in their attachment with them, or we take in our caregiver's attachment with themselves, then that becomes our attachment with ourselves, and then that becomes how we relate to the whole world. And there's a saying I tell my people I work with all the time. I'm like, it's all a mirror.
Mm.
Whatever you draw into your life is a direct reflection of what's going on inside of you. I don't have to do a 5-page assessment to try to figure out what your faulty beliefs are. I can just ask you about your problems and I can tell you your faulty beliefs. So a lot of that doesn't come down to trauma. A lot of it comes down to attachment. And we didn't get the secure, safe, stable attachment from our caregivers. And therefore, we don't have it with ourselves. And therefore, we go out and we draw people into our lives who match how we feel about ourselves. And so that's kind of what I see in my practice more. I mean, I do have the trauma, but trauma literally is pretty easy to treat. You know, they've got um, EMDR and these cutting edge therapies that literally shift the way the brain processes information. It's the attachment wounding that's really, really difficult to shift. And the reason why is because if you have a trauma wound, then the way it works is that when a person experiences a trauma, it's a certain event that gets kind of stuck in the brain, and the brain can't process it the way it's supposed to. Well, if it's one event, you can isolate that and treat it.
Mhm.
But attachment wounding happens day in and day out in a child's life. And so it's almost like it's woven in the infrastructure of the neural networks of the brain. And so it's a lot harder to identify because it's just the water you swam in when you were growing up. You didn't know it was dirty. And number two, it shows up everywhere. It shows up in your relationships with yourself, your relationship with others, your relationship with money, your relationship with food. All of it, in my opinion, goes down to attachment.
Mhm, mhm. I love that. I always tell people that I think inner child healing is the root of all.
Yes. Yeah. And if you ask people to ask me what I do all the time, well, I do a lot of things, but one thing that I really do is a lot like in-depth inner child healing, and not like, oh, go see that 3-year-old and write a letter to that 3-year-old. Like
Mhm.
people do. I mean, I do really, really in-depth inner child healing with people because I truly believe it's those parts of us that we kind of said, oh, you're the problem. I'm going to leave you back there and I'm going to go on and create this life that outlives you, that
Mm,
causes us majority of our issues in life today.
mhm, mhm. Ah, I just love hearing this from you because this is what I've discovered in my own journey of healing like my own attachment wounds and
Hmm.
finding all of the ways in which I was filling my void using competitions to make myself feel better, using my business to fuel my ego, and really operating from when I figured out that one of the main drivers of my motivation was to prove to my father that I could do it and that I could be better than him, was like a very big ego death for me, and really
Yeah.
identifying and like, oh wow, like this is the energy that I've been operating from, and this is the energy that I use to create my business, and really all of it to fuel my ego. I mean, that was like a huge awakening for me.
Mm.
um
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, yeah.
So this is really good. I mean, I think everyone's going to just be mind blown by that 5 minutes. Um, when we recognize that we have an attachment wound, and I mean, this is for, I think all of our listeners know. So, all of the listeners here know exactly what inner child healing is. We've dove deep into it. They know how to identify core wounds, and I'm actually going to use the word attachment wounds now moving forward in this podcast so that we can stay in alignment with it. when we're doing this work of inner child healing, a lot of what I've seen, my clients and just listeners who, email in is, a lot of it can be so heavy. And a lot of times they have problems like dissociating during the work, or they don't want to relive that trauma. So it becomes really hard for them to kind of find the learning lessons or kind of reprocess to heal and to integrate the experiences. What advice do you have for anyone who's diving into the work, the shadow work, and they're kind of getting caught in that, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So I'm an expert on dissociation. So you could ask me about that all day long. That's one of my specialties. So if you truly have a dissociative disorder, then inner child healing is going to be something that you struggle to do on your own
Mm,
because it's all set up around a phobia of inner experience. So what that means is like the main person walking around doing life, not am kind of scared to go near that child self because the child self is the one I disowned all my wounds into. And
mm,
so if you go near the child self is like, thank goodness somebody's here. I can tell you all about what happened to me. And then you might get flooded. And so then that's when dissociation is going to happen. And dissociation is just like our nature's gift to us that when our body can't run, our mind does. So I would say if that's happening to you, please find a therapist who can help you in that process. In the therapy world, we don't really call it inner child healing anymore. We call it ego state therapy.
mm,
Okay. We call it ego state therapy. So if you feel like inner child healing is something that helps you, find somebody who specializes in ego state therapy. If the dissociation piece is just too much, then yeah, that's what I would suggest. Now, what I believe in terms of attachment wounds and inner child healing is what drives attachment wounds are two things. One is unmet needs.
mhm,
Okay. And the second is internal recording. So I'll talk to you about both of those. But if you're doing the work on your own, then what I would say is as you're working with your inner child, before you swoop in and want to rescue them or want to have them tell you their story, spend a few minutes connecting with them and asking yourself, what does this younger me need now that it did not get back then? And spend a few minutes sending the intention of offering that to that younger you
mm,
because it's that part of you is stuck because it still needs its needs met in the moment. And guess what? There's nobody coming to save you. You got to save yourself. So you're the one who gets to go meet the needs today.
mhm,
And so, this is what I do in my work with people. The first thing we do is meet the younger part's needs, and so some of the core needs I would say are safety,
mhm.
feeling seen. A lot of people walk around with invisibility wounds, which is a whole a whole entire, I think, new phenomenon because of how much people work and all this stuff. But anyway, so being seen and also unconditional love, unconditional acceptance. But safety is probably core, making sure that that part knows it's safe today, and the love and the acceptance and just a warm presence. So it's kind of about how you approach the inner child. If you approach the inner child like, come on, let's hear what you got to say because you're the source of my problems and I want you to stop, that's not going to work. If you approach with love and warmth and compassion and a sense of safety, then that child will probably trust you to work with you. If not, if you approach the child in the same way the parents approach the child, which is kind of like, hey, you're an inconvenience and you're taking up our time, then of course the child's going to dissociate
Mhm,
because
mhm,
it can feel. I mean, it is you, so it can feel exactly what you're feeling.
mhm.
So I would say that for people who don't have a true like dissociative disorder, then if they're just struggling to connect to their inner child, try doing the meeting of the needs first
Mhm.
and really spending time meeting needs.
I really love that. So, funny, I mean, it's not funny, coincidence or not a coincidence. One of my mastermind calls today, because a lot of the listeners here are coaches, she was struggling with posting her content, right? Content that's going to help her community, help her potential clients, and to start to build her community. And so we were doing inner child healing on this. And the biggest thing that I've also seen within my clients, my community, is the fear of being seen. And we connected that one of her attachment wounds was not being seen as a child by her mother. And
Mm-hmm.
it was like, well, I don't want to post content because then what if I post it and then no one recognizes my worth? What if no one likes it? No one, so what if it helps no one? So it's like she's self-rejecting herself because of that fear of being seen, because she never saw herself. So we tied it back to, and one of the things I told her was really set the intention before you press post that this is an action that you're taking for your inner child by telling her, I see you. I
Yeah.
see you, and therefore we are going to post this content. We're not posting this content to be seen. And it was like just this, it was just such a beautiful little moment. But going back to the fear of being seen, do you think that this is why we are so obsessed and attachment and addicted to effort and overachieving and overworking?
It could be being seen. A lot of times, people who are addicted to overworking feel like they're a burden at their core.
Mm.
So one of the first questions I usually ask people whenever I'm doing a history, I do something called a genogram for a history, is were you planned? Because if you weren't, if because you can get you'll get a lot of information from one question,
I
and so
wasn't.
if you ask, yeah, so if you ask if you were planned, and they're like, no, my mom got pregnant, then my parents got married, and they had a terrible marriage, blah 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 blah, then kind of at the core, that person, not all the time, but at the core, the person's maybe going to feel like a burden. And so then they constantly feel like they have to earn their worth and value by constantly working, constantly giving back, constantly doing, constantly trying to prove their worthiness to exist.
I'm laughing because you like tied up the 3 years of therapy I did in 10 seconds.
Yeah, I could have figured that out in one question. There
Yeah.
you go. I could have figured that out in one question. But what you learn, but it took me years to figure that out. So yeah. So that I
So
feel like overworking is more because I have the burden wound, right? I have the burden wound. And so I constantly wrestle with my workaholism, and at least I know it. Okay. And so I have the burden wound. And so I think in my own process
mhm,
of figuring that out, I was like, oh, so then I could see it in other people. So
got it.
again, it was like I healed it first. And so then I could go and see it in other people. And when people hear it, they're like, yes, that's exactly how I felt. I felt like a burden my whole life.
Mhm,
Like you didn't ask to be here.
mhm,
And nobody has to prove their right to exist. We exist for a I tell people, you came on this world through your parents, but not for them. You
mm,
came for a bigger purpose. And so yeah, the fear of being seen, fear of being seen will kind of sh- that will show up more in people who probably work hard but don't want to take credit for it.
mm.
Don't It's a different thing. It's different. It's like they're just going to work. The people are going to work hard, but they don't want any kind of praise. They don't want any credit for it, as opposed to burden people, where it's like they want people to know because they're trying to get their existence validated.
Mhm,
Like,
mhm. Yeah.
um,
I see the two. I'm definitely the burden one. And then with my client that we saw today, that was oh sorry, I'm the one that wants to be validated and overworking. And I can see the fear of being seen as the burden because she also has a
yeah,
hard time acknowledging her wins and giving herself like credit for what she's achieved.
yeah.
I'd love
But
to.
I just want to tell you, so the wound that I've seen more lately is different than fear of being seen. It's called invisibility wound. So these are the people who were raised in what look like from the outside, and they are, your normal, typical family uh, environments. But both parents are working, and then whenever parents get home, they have so much to do around the house. It's like the child literally feels invisible. Like parents are creating this whole world for this child, giving them everything they want, but the child feels invisible. And so then that person just feels this complete and total like absence
Mm,
inside. It's like they have a dark hole inside. These Whenever I meet people like that, and they just all they wanted was to be seen.
mm,
And I do think one of my pet peeves, I don't have children, so I can say stuff like this, is in this age of cell phones when people are on their cell phones all the time and looking at cell phones. and not their kids, like that's causing a lot of invisibility wounds because we have this whole part of our brain that requires social engagement in order to feel safe. And it requires us being like connected with face to face interaction in order for us to be able to have a sense of safety in the world. And when people are looking at phones rather than one another, that's not being developed. So it's just something that I see more prevalent in my practice, probably in the last 5 or 6 years, as the people who grew up with cell phones are starting to emerge. So invisibility wounds are different than fear of being seen.
Okay.
It's just this sense of, it's almost like this sense of just feeling obsolete, feeling like you don't exist, feeling like no matter what you do, you're just not recognized. And there are people who, in a conversation, other people will talk over them. It's like they don't know how to exert their authority in life because they just felt invisible.
Mhm.
So, anyway, just so your listeners know, that's something new I've seen coming around in my practice. And people, when you get the invisibility wound, they feel so seen and heard. They're like, that is exactly it. And they feel crazy because they feel like they were raised in a home where both parents or whoever their caregivers were are working hard to provide for them. They had everything they could ever want, and yet they still felt unloved.
Mhm.
They still felt like they were not a part of. And
Mhm.
so they feel like they're just spoiled and selfish. And I'm like, no, you felt invisible. And when
Mhm.
they hear it, when that lands in their spirit, it's like, yes, that's exactly how I felt. Thank you. You've put it into words for me.
Mm.
So
Just want to take a moment. Because if that's you listening to this, acknowledging right now that you're not invisible. Because I see that a lot too, where they're
yeah,
like, I had such a great upbringing. Like, my parents did the best that they could, but why do I feel like this? That's so amazing for you to
yeah.
be able to put that into words. I'd love to hear your take on the worthiness wound, because I know a lot of my listeners, myself including, that is one of the big ones, self-worth, and really tying our self-worth to a lot of different external validations and kind of at
Yeah.
the core, just like not feeling good enough. So it's like feeling fundamentally flawed.
Yeah. I would say that that's tied to all the wounds we talked about already. They all kind of funnel back into that one, right? But conditional, conditional circumstances to have love and acceptance. Like, if you do this, then this. If you do this, then we'll accept you. If you do this, then we'll love you. You have to be this way in order for us to love you. It's um, some parents struggle with children becoming autonomous, meaning becoming their own sense of independence and expressing themselves and learning who they are. That autonomy naturally needs to happen
Mhm.
around age 2, age 5, and then every 3 or 4 years thereafter, and then teenagers come. That's a whole nother animal. But some parents can't allow that. It's like you have to think and feel and believe the way we want you to, and so it really comes down to conditional,
Mm.
having conditions on love and having conditions on acceptance. And so then we put the conditions on ourselves because we can only take in what we're raised around.
Mhm.
So that's what I would say the worthiness wounds come from. But so what happens is the way I figure out people's wounds,
Mhm.
because it's really interesting. Everybody is different. It's really, really interesting. I do intensive therapy. So people come to me for like 3 days at a time, and I spend 18 hours in someone's mind. It's incredible the stuff that comes up. It's like, I love my job. And, but everybody is different. You could come with one wound and the same wound, like a burden wound. You could come with a burden wound, and another person can come with a burden wound. And they present the same in terms of symptoms sometimes, but what created them could be so different. And so the way I figure all that out is that one thing that happens whenever you are raised around people consistently and how you feel they should be treating you doesn't match how they treat you is the mind gets confused. And when the mind gets confused, it doesn't do us any favors. It makes a recording of those people acting in that way, and then it takes and stores the recording inside the mind. And that recording can look like, sound like, and act like mom, dad, grandma, brother, sister, teacher, whoever it was that the mind decided to take a recording of. And that recording has a message attached to it. And so the message the recording is sending is usually what's keeping people's patterns in their lives alive. And so it's so interesting whenever I start working with the inner child. And then I ask the inner child, like, as you look around, who do you see that's sending you a message? And they start telling me who it is. And I start to see how all the messages interact. And we start to piece together, oh, that's why I do that. That's why, I feel like I always attract these unavailable partners, or this is why I have affairs, or this is why I constantly sabotage myself when I get to a level of success. And it's all in the messages. So when it comes to a worthiness wound, that's where I'm going with all this, it can be so varied, but it's all, if you can figure out what the message you internalized or the recordings inside of you that are speaking to you constantly, there's like a subconscious, like unconscious. They're not very conscious, they're unconscious, but they're planted there in the unconscious mind. And as you know, being a hypnotherapist, the unconscious mind drives 90% of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can figure out your messages, then you have the first step in overcoming the messages. And so really the worthiness wound can be caused by any of those messages that we took in about how we should think, feel, act, and behave in order to gain love and acceptance.
Mm-hmm. And
then we're just living our life according to those messages now.
Mm-hmm. And then we can replant different messages through hypnotherapy.
Yes. Well, I usually turn them off. Whenever I work with people, we find the recordings and turn them off. And then at the end, I do a hypnotherapy recording for them that helps replant the new messages into the unconscious mind. So,
side note, Laura and I were at the same NLP training, and she was the one who did my hypnotherapy. And I actually talked about you on a previous episode. She is the reason for my quantum leap, you guys.
Yay!
She had such an amazing, I was like deep, like my body was doubled over, like deep into trance. And
yeah,
the messages that she implanted were so amazing. Like, so Laura, this is my first time telling Laura, like, I've got Facebook ads running. My business is scaled. Like, shit's just blowing off. Like, it's
awesome. That's what happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I can tell from you speaking to me earlier, you've already done the work to kind of clean out the gutters of the mind. And so then the mind was just like, okay, what's going to flow through here now? And then like that hypnotherapy session came at the right time. But the gutters had to be cleaned out first. So a lot of times people can come to a hypnotherapy session, but if you haven't cleaned out all the junk, the messages and the imprints and all the things that we pick up along the way, then the mind might not take the suggestions.
Yeah, there's no
as well. Yeah, I think it's a package. You have to treat the past and then tell the mind what you want in the future. And you just, I don't know. I'm a therapist, so of course I'm gonna say something like this. I just think that you can't circumvent your past.
No.
You have to do that work. And I tell people I have to have the title of therapist in order to have a license, in order to like do what I do. But I'm really a truth seeker. Like, I'm trying to figure out the truth. What is the truth of your story so that you can own your truth? You can say, yes, this feels right to me. Your soul can take a deep breath, and then you can move forward. Because a lot of people are just trying to make sense of how their present life got to the place it is. And so that's kind of what I think people have to do before they go and like craft a new future. It's like, well, you got to go clean the past up first.
Yeah, you got to be willing to heal and to be vulnerable and to do this work. So I'd love to hear your take on doing the work. That's something that we talk about a lot on this podcast, and something that I am like, I mean, I agree with exactly what you said of like, you first have to heal yourself, right? And so like, I've done so much work. I remember like my first therapy session, my therapist was like, we did more in 3 sessions than people do in 3 years. And I think part of it is because like I was ready and I came in full openness. Like, I am just ready. And I know that I need this. And I know I'm not unique. I know a lot of the listeners of this episode are the same, like very ambitious women who want to heal. They want to be the best version of themselves, but some of them aren't doing the work. And so I'd love to get your take on, to you, what does it mean to do the work? And maybe there might be some new things that you throw in there that we haven't even heard about yet.
Yeah. So for me personally, I've been on a constant therapy journey since probably I was 19 years old, and it's ranged from talk therapy, which was good, but I really didn't feel like anything was getting done. I'm a very results oriented person, so like when I walk in, I want to feel better when I walk out. Like I don't want to just talk about what we're gonna do. And to doing my own EMDR. I did that for a couple years, and then I did the ego state therapy, which I think I'm so big on the ego state therapy, which is the inner child work, because that's what really shifted me. Because I realized I didn't have the trauma wounds. So when I went to do the EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is a pretty in vogue treatment, trauma treatment right now.
I did that.
Yeah. So whenever I did it, it just didn't have that thorough of a healing is what I was looking for, because I didn't really have the trauma,
Mhm.
except for stuff I did to myself. But that's another story. So then the attachment wounds, that's what really shifted things for me. And that's where I started to really piece my story together. So I did a few intensives with one of my mentors doing that. And then I found the world of hypnotherapy. So at this point, what I do is once a month, I do an actual hypnotherapy session with my mentor, Natasha Bray, she's in the UK, and she does a hypnotherapy session with me once a month. And then I do my self recordings all the time. And I've got spiritual coaches, I got business coaches, I got all kinds of coaches, I'm like, my goodness, it takes a lot of work just to stay a sane human being. On top of all of that, the one thing that I will say that I have done consistently, and I think this is hugely important, because it's not like you can just show up to a therapy session and say, okay, fix me, and then change nothing else about your life. You got to do some work to change some things. Is probably for 19, probably for almost 16 years. Not how long I've been in recovery, 19 years. So 19 years. I do a daily morning routine, like literally every morning I get up and it takes me 45 minutes. I'm like, the stuff I have to do to deal with people. And so I meditate every day. I do my little spiritual practices. I kind of do a self hypnosis every day, and then I meditate or spend some time like sitting in reflection about whoever I'm working with that day and what direction I should take in their process. And so I think all of it combined is how I work on myself.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's not just about therapy; it's about the things you do outside of therapy too. I can't just show up once a month to Natasha and say, "Hey, tell me what I need to fix and help me
Mhm.
figure myself out." I have to spend time with myself,
Mhm.
because you're the most important relationship in your life, and so every day I spend at least 40, like alone by myself with me,
Mhm.
and that has truly, I think, more than all the other stuff, been what has been most healing for me. Is just learning to be with me.
Mhm.
And now I actually like me. It's really cool. I tell people, if you fall in love with yourself, you don't really need anybody else. It's a wonderful thing. I'm like, I could have other people, but they're like a cherry on the sundae.
Yeah.
I'm fine just by myself.
I love that. We have so many parallels in our journey. Inner child healing was also like really, really transformative for me. And um who it was my massage therapist who introduced it to me. She was like, because I really wanted a baby. And this was like 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And she was like, well, before you have a baby, like, why don't you take a look at little Shanae in there? And I was like, what do you mean? And I can now say, looking back, me wanting a child was to fill a void. And like, what a burden to put on my unborn child to fill my void. Like, what a burden. I'm so glad,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
glad that didn't happen. Because I mean, I'm obsessed with kids. I can't wait to have kids. And I talk about this all the time. My listeners know like my story. And and all of this, but inner child healing was the most pivotal thing for me in connecting to her, and not even like connecting to her like how you said to fix her, but just connecting to connect. And so for our listeners, in your journaling, this is a really great space for when you do your energy check, like you can swap out energy for inner child. What does my inner child need to hear today?
Yeah. Yeah.
And connect with her in that way. And Laura, the fact that you do a morning routine, we call it morning self-care, so important. So I move, breathe, meditate, do a little movement. I like to do qigong, and then breath work with meditation and self reiki. So that's my everyday like commitment to self, no matter how busy it gets, no matter if kitten
Hmm.
season is here. So you're looking at a
Yes.
sleep deprived kitten mother. No matter what, though, it's like no matter
Yeah.
what is going on in my life, I need to have that. And when we can start to prioritize ourselves in this way, like that's what I think really doing the work is. Like, how can you set your life up so that you're not letting yourself down anymore? Like,
Yeah.
stop being a doormat, like stop putting yourself last. It's not selfish to create time for yourself, and that really is going to be like the foundation of our inner work. So I'm so glad that you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a non-negotiable for me. And I love to sleep, but I lose an hour of sleep every day doing it. And I'm like you, it doesn't matter
Mhm.
what time I go to bed. It doesn't matter what I have on the agenda. I get up and I do that. I at least do 20 minutes, even if I'm like out of town, out of my normal routine. I'm at least going to do my 20-minute meditation.
Yay.
It's important.
Yeah. You're hearing it from a therapist, you guys. It's important.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I feel like we covered so much today. I wasn't expecting us to dive into attachment wounds, but I'm so glad we did. I think that's going to just like shed a lot of like light on a lot of
Hmm.
people on kind of what they're experiencing.
Yeah. 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 It does. And I think that it it really validates people who call me, because I get, people who call me from all over the country wanting to come in for an intensive, and but they don't really even know what they're like. Yeah, I know you do EMDR, but I don't have any trauma. And when I start telling them about attachment wounds, they say that's exactly what I'm struggling with.
Mhm.
And so it really validates people so they don't feel like they're just crazy or selfish or spoiled or dramatic or all the things that they might have been told during their life. No, you're not. You truly have a wounding in your ability to relate to yourself.
Mhm.
And that wounding was passed down
Mhm.
by somebody who didn't know how to relate to themselves. And therefore, the only option, like you said, if you'd have had a baby before you did that work, you wouldn't have had an option. You can't give what you don't have.
Mhm. Yeah.
So it's great that you did the work, and now you'll be able to pass down all that healing to your little one,
Yeah. Not passing the mother wound, but
not passing the mother wound.
instead passing the healing and the love.
That's right. That's right. That's what we want to pass.
Yeah, it's stopping generational trauma and also
Oh,
past
yeah.
life. It's I think in this lifetime, like one of my really strong beliefs is that one of our sort of jobs, so to speak, in our lives is to stop the trauma, is to do the work to heal, so that we're not then passing this on. And it's our soul's journey to heal. It's our soul's journey to come back home to who we truly are. And I mean, when I use the word healing, I don't mean it to mean like you're broken or like, like, because you're not, like you're perfect. And
No.
our soul's journey and our soul's purpose is to unlearn all of this bullshit that we have like picked up over the years about who we are or who we are not or what we're capable of, so that we can really come home to who we are, like come home to ourselves. That's like what I really
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah. I tell people that what I believe is we're born like with this perfect soul, perfect little being, and then we're handed to wounded people and they get to imprint all their wounds on us. And so then our like journey in this lifetime is to shed all the imprints and to shed all the wounds and come back to the place we were born. It's kind of it's full circle. You get to come back to the place you were born, where you're reconnected to your soul and you're living in a place of peace,
Mm.
because peace is worth the price. Peace is worth the price.
You have a book in you, right?
Yeah, well,
Like
I
this.
need I need five other people to write. I need five of me, okay? And one of them can write the book.
We'll talk about it. Because my next question was like, how can we find you? How can we work with you? I know the question, the answer to that question. So, how can we find you? How can we learn more from you? Where do you kind of show up in the online space?
Yeah, that's funny. No, I don't really show up online
I
because I don't
know.
have time.
Sorry, guys. This is
I'm
all we
literally
get from
like, I'm
her.
like, I'm booked till July, and then I'm like, and people are still calling me. I'm like, I don't know, because
Well,
people book 3 days at a time with me. So it's anyways, I would say that the best way to contact me is my email, which is F as in Frank Mullis MULLIS at gmail.com. And then my website is Triumph, like Triumph of your past, triumph-center.net.
I'll have
So
everything
that's
linked.
me right now. But yeah. Other than
Yeah,
that, I don't really
you
show
guys,
up online much.
I know. So I'm saying, like, these listeners, like, you guys are really special right now. Like, you
Yeah.
won't find Laura on the internet. That this is just like amazing. I mean, your work is so phenomenal. I am such a fan of it. I mean, you know how much I love you, and I can't wait for this podcast to just be in people's hands because it's just, I mean, it's like 5% of what you do, but it's that 5% that's just going to open Pandora's box for them so that they can truly step into this work and start to do the work because you are not broken. Like, because even though you've been through trauma or even attachment wounds, now that I think about it, all of mine, I mean, there's been some trauma in my life, but a lot of it is the attachment wounds. And like, I think so many of us have shame around it, have shame around the feelings that we
Mm,
have and the past that we have. And a lot of times, shame then clouds their vulnerability and makes it even
yeah.
worse. And so it's like, you're not alone and you're not broken. Like, I think
Yeah.
I had a call with one woman and she was like, I've been struggling with this for 30 years.
Yeah.
She
That's a
felt like
shame.
there was no hope for her. And I was like, no, that is not true. So,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah. We get it all tangled and we start to think it's who we are. Now, I call shame the master circuit breaker. It's kind of like if you think of emotions as different circuit breakers in your home. When something like sadness or fear or anger cut on, then shame will come and flip. And the master shame's like the master circuit breaker. It's our way to stay away from all the other stuff we don't want to feel.
that's a great analogy.
And so, yeah, so shame a lot of times is really just a way to stay away from grief and deep sadness. But people don't even know what they're grieving because they don't really understand. They think, oh, I had a great childhood, or I didn't get nobody beat me, nobody did anything to me, so what's wrong with me?
Hmm.
And so it's really getting in the nuances
Hmm.
with people and understanding. And I tell people that in the work I do, when you know the right problem, things get better quicker because you can offer the right treatment. So that's why I'm really big about people understanding the difference between trauma and attachment wounds.
Hmm.
'Cause you don't treat attachment wounds the same way you treat trauma wounds.
I'm going to make that a quote for you
Yeah.
so you can share it on your Facebook.
No, yeah. If you know what you're treating, things get better quicker.
I love that. I think that's, we can kind of like wrap the little bow right there. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I want to say the next time that you are in a space, because I get in them too, where we're kind of in that beating ourselves up space and running the hamster wheel of negative self talk, pause and step back and ask yourself, whose voice is it? Because a lot of times, if you just trust your unconscious, it'll tell you whose voice it is. It'll say it's dad, it's mom, it's ex, or it's a coworker, or it's a this, or it's a that. And once you realize that it's not even your beliefs, that's the first step to getting rid of them. So ask yourself next time you're stuck in one of those spirals, whose voice is this?
So good. So good. Actually, I have one more question for you. Ready?
Yeah.
What does it mean to you to be your highest self?
So to be my highest self means that I live in a way where I don't, this sounds very biblical, but it's not sin against my own conscience. Like I do what feels right to me moment to moment, even if it means that other people don't agree with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been like a trailblazer and a maverick in that way. I'll go do something that other people are like, Laura, crazy. But I'm like, nope, this is what I need to do right now. And then eventually everybody follows me because they're like, actually, what Laura's doing works. So I think living in a way where I don't like alignment, don't sin against my own conscience. This is so key. I want to tell everybody on the podcast because I know like you never arrive, right? Like I'm okay with that. I had to find this place inside me where I'm like, I can always work on something.
Mhm.
And so my highest self is just that quest for enlightenment, I guess they would call it in the spiritual world, but this place of equanimity, peace, love,
Mm.
and living from your heart space.
Mm. I love that. My favorite quote is, "You have arrived when arrival is no longer the goal."
Oh, I love that quote.
Yeah, I forgot who said it, but you can quote me if you want.
Yeah.
Laura, thank you so much for just your presence today. I want to take a moment to acknowledge you. I think
Thank you.
that you are such an incredible human. I want to acknowledge you for all the work that you've done.
Well, thank you so much for letting me come on the podcast, and I want to thank everybody for listening today.
It is we are thankful. You're amazing. If you're in the highest self mastermind, Laura's going to be a guest speaker. So excited for you to meet my clients in that capacity. For everyone else, I'd love to hear your insights. If you love this episode, make sure you share it with a friend, tag your mom, tag your sister, tag your auntie, anybody who needs to hear this message. And if you would like to work with Laura, she does 1 to 3 day intensives, right? In Georgia?
It just depends on the person how long it is.
Okay.
But yeah.
And she's going to be launching some luxury retreats in the future. So if that is
Yes, I'm excited.
1 week retreats, I'll have everything linked down in the show notes. If you'd like to work with her, she's booked out for a long time, but maybe if you're lucky, you can get into her schedule. And if you guys have any questions, you can always email me, but I'd love to just hear about, what is the first action step you're going to be taking after hearing what Laura has shared with us today. And I want to remind everyone to integrate, right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Don't be on that consumption trail where you're just listening. Really, really take the what she shared today and integrate that into your life. Let it marinate inside of you so that it becomes whole within your system, because there really is nothing else that you can do besides like what Laura has talked about. Like this is top 1%. Like this is it. So don't go reading more books about this. Anyhow, thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys next week, same time, same place. Don't forget to be your highest self. Bye for now.